In this series, we're going to cover the Nordic Crusades that were carried out by Scandinavians. I'm Quill History, and today we're going to start by covering the Swedish Crusades in Finland, whether they could be said to actually have happened, and the part they played in Finland's incorporation into the Kingdom of Sweden for many centuries. Stay tuned. The shoreline of southern Finland had ever since the Viking Age been populated with Swedish-speaking peoples, as well as having a close relationship to the small Swedish kingdom of Svealand in the west. As the Christianization of Scandinavia occurred between the 9th and 11th century, the petty kingdoms in today's Sweden over time got consolidated into larger and more powerful Christian kingdoms. With a zeal for the new religion, these new Christian kings looked east across the Baltic Sea to expand Christendom as well as their own influence, and with the advent and success of the First Crusade in the late 11th century, the kings in Sweden soon set out on military conquests to conquer the pagan Finns in the east, presenting the conquests as holy wars with the purpose to expand Christendom. Two such expeditions are said to have taken place during the 12th and 13th century. However, given the inadequate source material, it's uncertain if both of them took place. According to the chronicler of Saint Eric, the mythical King Eric the Holy is said to have arranged a successful military expedition with Bishop Henry of Uppsala to the southern Finnish shoreline during the mid-12th century to spread Christianity into the region. Once having defeated the tribes in southern Finland, King Eric is said to have sailed back west, with Bishop Henry staying to carry out missionary work and suffering martyrdom as the pagan Finns turned against their Christian overlords as soon as King Eric and his soldiers had left. Whether this expedition actually have taken place is questionable, since the people living on the Finnish shoreline most likely already had adopted Christianity by the middle of the 12th century. We do have a letter from Pope Alexander III in Rome, which was written to the Swedish bishops in 1171, where he complains that the Finns only promised to become good Christians while being threatened by the sword, but quickly returns to their old pagan ways once the Swedish forces leaves. This complaint could refer to a holy war conducted by King Eric, but it could just as well refer to general Swedish expansionist politics that occurred in the Baltic Sea during the High Middle Ages. In the coming decades during the 12th and early 13th century, several Swedish kings would launch expeditions into the Finnish inland known as Tavastaland, with much success. This successful expansion was likely not due to military victories, but rather due to the willingness of the pagan lords to freely submit to the Swedish crown. By the early 13th century, Sweden was still a poor and sparsely populated country, but the strength in its political and spiritual system gave considerable power and legitimacy to all the nobles that chose to become part of it, in a way that was unheard of in the Finnish pagan societies, from which it followed that many of them willingly decided to submit to the crown as well as the cross. However, not all Finns in Tavastaland were willing to give up their pagan ways, and in the 1230s a popular pagan uprising arose, with the current Pope Gregorius IX being informed that the Tavastians had fallen from the faith and returned to their old pagan ways. To counter this, the Pope in 1237 called for all the lords in Sweden to unite in a crusade against the Tavastians, whose alleged malice was vigorously described. The call was answered with the Swedish king Erik Eriksson gathering a large host, sailing east and marching up into the Finnish inland. The details of the conflict are unknown, but the pagan rebels are said to have fought fiercely, but in the end being defeated by the Swedish host. Once the violence had ceased, the Finns who had rebelled were given the choice between becoming Christians and keeping their property, or be put to the sword. When the rebellion had been crushed and the crusade thus being over, King Eric seized an old Finnish Viking castle called Haikonen and turned it into a medieval stronghold, from which the future Swedish kings would dominate Finland for many decades. the Crusade of 1237 and the construction of Haikonen marks an important point in Swedish history, since it was at this time that Finland truly got consolidated as the natural eastern half of the Swedish realm for many centuries. Today I hope you learned something new about the Northern Crusades, and don't forget that if you like this video and want to see more videos like it, hit the like, share and subscribe buttons.